agree with Larry as he leads this class today that we might always look to you as the grand creator, Father, that you are the sustainer of all life, and that one day we hope to live with you in heaven. In Christ's name, amen.
I want to start by talking about next quarter's class just a little bit. It's going to be on the history of the church. And in my opinion, if you want to know the history of something, you got to figure out what that something is first. There is a good book that was written by Brother V.E. Howard called What is the Church of Christ? And it was, the 6th edition was in 1989. I checked and that book is out of print, and I called Sister Anita and she got in touch with the bookstore at Amridge, and they can't locate any either. So I was trying to get a book in everybody's hand, but if you go to estate sales, yard sales, or happen to see one, those are very good books. What is the Church of Christ? V.E. Howard. Latest edition was the 6th edition in 1989. So when we get, I wasn't going to go into that during the class. I was going to hopefully have y'all read that and study what is the church as we then proceed along the lines of the history of the church. Today we're going to cover a little bit about biomimicry and then a little bit about atheism, and we might as well start with biometrics. What does the term biometrics even mean? Where does that word come from? It comes from two Greek words, bios and mimesis. And bio, the meaning of that word is life, and then mimesis, as you can probably figure out, is imitation or copy or something along those lines. So in technical terms, the scientists today, what they look at is the imitation of natural biological designs or processes in engineering or inventions. So let's start by looking at some of that and see if we can focus on it a little bit better. First thing is the common housefly. Now, what can you learn from a common housefly? I'm sorry? Patience. I have none when it comes to those little irritating buggers. But what purpose do they serve? God knows, but anyway. Scientists, engineers have come up with a robot that is very, very similar to a fly in both size and weight and movement and everything. And I want to read what they have to say on this. So, according to Dr. Ron Fleming, one of the engineers working on the project, the fly is the fighter jet of the animal world. And if you think about it, have you ever tried to catch a fly and been successful? They get away more times than you catch them though, right? They can change speed, direction. They can even land on the ceiling upside down. So they're a marvel within themselves. And they say it took nature millions of years and endless evolutionary experiments to build a flying insect. Berkeley electrical engineering professor Ron Fearing and his team looked to nature and the pioneering experiments of Berkeley biologist Michael Dickinson in an attempt to distill the lessons of insect flight down to the fundamentals. As Dickinson began to unlock the aerodynamic secrets of how insects fly, the engineers found themselves at a disadvantage to nature. Life builds on its past successes, adapting that which survives to new circumstances. Features that are useful show up in new creatures. Engineers like Fearing, however, did not have a huge existing toolbox of robotic features to draw upon in terms of parts on the shelf. There were no muscles, no wings. Despite that, after 3 years of effort, his team was has met a major milestone. They have a robotic creature, something that flaps and is the right size. Now,
Can you go back a slide? So when you're saying this, are you saying it's imitation of something living, but it's in a man-made state, or is it talking about imitation as far as like an insect that looks like a leaf, living to a living, or is it living to a?
well, where we're looking at right now is scientists are looking at the insects and imitating the insects. Now there is a mimicry in nature that we wasn't going to cover. We're just looking at the man-made part of it now. Then that little thing that they made, it was still attached to a wire because they couldn't figure out how to get it powered and all. But then in May of 2018, engineers at the University of Washington have for the first time cut the cord and added a brain, allowing their RoboFly to take its first independent flaps. This might be one small flap for a robot, but it's one giant leap for robot kind. The team will present its findings May 23rd at the International Conference of Robotics and Automation in Brisbane, Australia. RoboFly is slightly heavier than a toothpick and is powered by a laser beam. It uses a tiny onboard circuit that converts the laser energy into enough electricity to operate its wings. Now, why do they do this? Can you imagine good and bad things coming from something like this? It would be good because if they put a camera in there, it can go places that other things can't. It could help search efforts in caves, burning buildings. I mean, there's any number of good uses it could have. But how many times throughout history, has man invented something for good use that has been turned to bad use? And I'll let your mind go where it wants to on how many things how many places a camera can go that you don't want them, and spying and various things like that. But it's amazing to me. They say that everything developed over the millennia, that it discards the stuff that's not usable, it keeps the stuff that is usable. But in my opinion, when God created this, look how long it has taken man to come up with some kind of duplication or imitation that still is not as good as God's creation. It sort of reminds me of 1 Corinthians 1:25. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Now, where scientists have the idea that looking at nature to come up with all of these new developments and things like that, it's a new idea, it's a bold, great idea. Do you know that God, through Solomon, told man almost 3,000 years ago to look at things in nature to learn? Remember Proverbs 6:6? Go to the ant, thou sluggard. What's a sluggard? Somebody that's lazy. Basically, it's somebody that is habitually inactive or lazy. So, lazy person, go to the ant. Consider her ways and be wise. What does the word consider mean? I'm sorry?
Look at, imitate.
Look at, study, learn from, and then what does the word wise added to that mean? Once you have studied this ant, you look at it and you learn from it, and then you put that into application. I'd like for you to consider this for just a moment since we're talking about these things. A human being has approximately 100 billion brain cells. I haven't counted them, but this, science says this, so I'm believing them on this. Mankind has approximately 100 billion brain cells. An ant has approximately 250,000 brain cells. So man has 400,000 times more brain cells than an ant, but God told us to look at an ant and learn something. What can we learn from the ant? If we go to Proverbs 6 and 7 through 9, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Now I'm going to stop teaching and start meddling. How many of you are prepared for an emergency? How many of you have a stock of food on hand to last you more than a day or two, that you don't have to run to the store? Now, I know y'all are tired of hearing about me and my growing up years, so I'll use Jim as the example because I know Jim. We planted in the summer, we harvested, we put up things. In the wintertime, when it was too cold to work in the garden and work in the fields, we repaired the tools and got them ready for the next year. Living on a farm, there was no downtime. You worked around every day through the year at what was convenient, so when it come time to go to the field and plant, you didn't have to repair a tool. You didn't have to sharpen a tool. It was ready to go to use. Now, when we all started moving to the city and we don't have our farms anymore, I've already seen one hand. You don't need to show hands on this, but how many of you have a stockpile of food for an emergency? An emergency could happen at any time. That's why they call them emergencies. People in Florida with the hurricanes, we have tornadoes. Any number of things that could happen. We've had snowstorms where we've been without power for a week at a time. As a matter, we don't do that, but they have meals now. They have food that have a 25-year shelf life. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have to start eating some of that and get me some more on hand because mine's about to reach its shelf life, and I don't want it to go to waste. So isn't that following the example of the ant, being prepared for different things? See, I've said this many times before, but I worry about the younger generation. If they hadn't got the grocery store or fast food joint to go to, they're going to be hurting if a real emergency ever happens. They're just not going to know how to do things. How many of you know how to start a fire without a match? How many of you know that you can use a cotton ball and petroleum jelly and make a candle that might last a minute or two and give you a little extra heat to start that fire with? We need to follow God's instructions and learn from everything in nature. Off my soapbox now. Any questions, comments? Okay, move to something that we're all, well, no, let's back up just a little bit. I forgot this little critter. This ant here, called a Matabele ant, is an ant in South Africa. Now, most of us think ants are just a nuisance and that they are not smart. They just bother us. But recently, in 2017 and 18, they have discovered that this soldier ant that invades and takes care of termites. They do triage on their wounded comrades. They will carry them back to the nest, and they will provide medical care for the ant. If they've got a damaged limb, they take turns holding the limb in place and licking the wound. What does licking the wound do? Cleans, prevents infection, and they have discovered that if they isolate a wounded ant versus letting one be taken care of that way, that there's an 80% difference in survival rate because basically infection. So ants are not dumb creatures. They only live 45 to 60 days. How do they know all this? How did they learn all this? One good answer, one word: God. Now to something that we all put to use: Velcro. How did the idea of Velcro come into being? Pardon?
Space exploration?
Space exploration? No, we'll go back a few years before that. We can go back to the 1940s for this one. There was a man that was taking his dog for a walk and found kookaburras on the dog's fur. And as he started inspecting the kookaburra under the microscope and found out that it had all these little hooks, and then he thought about the dog's fur catching it all, he set out to make a material that would have the hooks and loops, and so he made Velcro, and he patented it in 1955. He had been using it from 1941, but he patented it in 1955. This little creature that most of us don't like, me especially, I'd rather face a diamondback rattlesnake than I had a recluse spider, but that's just me. But spiders, they have found that the silk that the spider weaves is actually stronger than steel by weight, by comparison. Now, when I was in the military and had to wear a flak jacket, they didn't have Kevlar. I didn't have one of the fanciest ones around. Mine only weighed about 30 pounds. They had them that weighed up to 45, depending on units and such. You're probably very familiar with those. But then they come up with Kevlar that reduced the weight, supposedly give it a little extra strength. But this particular spider here, called the bark spider, by weight comparison, an equal amount of steel versus the weight of the silk, it is 10 times stronger than Kevlar. They know that they can't get enough silk from these spiders to start making useful garments for military. So scientists, engineers, they're trying to finagle with, which I don't approve of. I don't think they need to be doing God's work. But they are trying to manipulate DNA from this creature into sheep to try to give sheep's wool the strength of spider silk. Like I say, I personally don't agree with them tinkering with nature that way. God put things in place for a reason, and they should not get into God's business, in my estimation. But that's what we're talking about on biomimicry. We could go on with a few more examples, but we won't, because we're going to switch to atheism unless somebody has a question or comment on biomimicry. Yes, ma'am.
Thinking about it, I really feel like everything that's ever been made is all biomimicry. It's either nothing new under the sun. Humans haven't actually come up with anything. These are just like the technologically most advanced ones, but I mean, whether it's a pot or clothing or whatever, it's all imitating something that God made first.
Yeah. Again, when Jim was growing up in the country and going out hunting, he would imitate different things to camouflage and so he could put meat on the table, right?
It's interesting that as developed as we are, and as big as our brains are, like you mentioned already, we're still pretty bad at this. You know, it took them a long time to cut the cord on that fake fly, that robot fly, and it's still not anywhere nearly as efficient or good as a fly is. It has to still have power transmitted to it just in a different way. It's not able to be self-contained. You know, and you look at all these different robot dogs and all this different stuff they've been working on. It's all pretty cool, but it still fumbles around and falls down. You know, and God has made these perfect creatures that even things that we feel like aren't that consequential or important, like an ant or a spider, God spent the time and got that perfect, you know, because God is perfect. And we can try to copy those things, and we just do kind of a bad job at it. It just proves again how perfect God was as a creator, is as a creator, and how the idea of evolution is just absolutely insane. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
That is an excellent point, because if you just look at the fly and a fighter jet, the guy compared it to the fighter jet of the animal kingdom. If a pilot in a jet today attempted to make movements as quick as the fly, direction changes as quick as the fly, they'd die. They couldn't stand the G-force. So how does that little fly manage to be unharmed doing all of that? God made him perfect. Yes, sir.
Same thing with a hummingbird. Those things are bullets.
They are. And if they can go backwards, up, down, yeah. But, yes, sir.
If they successfully fix the sheep where it can create wool as strong as steel, they're gonna have to come up with some special shears.
Well, yes, sir. They sometimes don't consider the collateral, sir?
Because I think I've seen that movie, it didn't turn out well.
Okay, anything else on biomimicry? Okay, we're going to move now into atheism, and I'm taking this one a little bit different direction than Apologetics Press, but where does the word atheism come from, or atheist come from? Again, it comes from the Greek word theos, meaning theism, which is belief in God. And then in the Greek, a means non or without, not or without. So if you put the a in front of theism and go to atheism, that just means that it's someone that has a disbelief in God. Now, last week we went through multiple verses of Scripture that were referring to God creating or making things and putting God there. So we believe God created everything. The atheists believe everything just happened. When you talk to an atheist, what are some of the reasons they give for being an atheist? Why don't they believe?
Because they can't see it.
No proof. God don't exist. You can't prove God exists. Well, last week, again, as we went through our verses, if you've taken the scientific approach, even though you can't see what created it, you know that the creation had design, so there had to be a designer, there had to be an intelligent maker. So where does the intelligent maker come in? God. So an atheist, even though one of the main things is you can't prove there's a God, they really are on the emotional side of things and not the intellectual side of things. I can't prove God. I absolutely can't prove God exists to meet anybody's standard. However, as we look at all the different things that has been in this world, how did they get here in such a perfect order if there wasn't some great somebody, something that put it there, and who has the power to do that? My reasoning is only God. So why do so many people today not believe God, and why is that number increasing? And I wanted to go down the increasing line. It is my opinion, and anybody that wants to jump in and say anything you want to at any time, but my opinion is that it is because of a series of events that have happened in America, especially in America, over the past few years, starting with the Scopes trial. You see, prior to the Scopes trial, prior to the 1800s, and we're going to look at some, well, let me just go that now and then I'll back up. Walter Jennings Bryan, who was on the prosecuting side of the trial, made the following comment: that belief in God is almost universal, and the effect of this belief is so vast that no one is appalled at the thought of what social conditions would be if reverence for God were erased from every heart. Now, this was around 1925 when he made this statement. We know that Darwin came in the mid-1800s and published works, and by the 1880s things were starting to pick up on an evolutionary line. But when this trial was held, schools taught creation, and they were introducing the theory of evolution. And then that's what this trial was all about in 1925. I want to read this that I've written to make sure I get all of this information out. In American schools, the Genesis creation narrative was generally taught as the origin of the universe and of life until Darwin's scientific theories became widely accepted. While there were some immediate backlash, organized opposition did not get underway until the fundamentalist modernist controversy broke out following World War I. Several states passed laws banning the teaching of evolution, while others debated them but did not pass them. The Scopes trial was the result of a challenge to the law in Tennessee. Scopes lost his case, and further U.S. states passed laws banning the teaching of evolution. And around that time was when he made that statement. In 1955, Albert Einstein made this statement, though: I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the object of his creation, whose purposes are modeled after our own. A God, in short, who is but a reflection of human frailty. Neither can I believe that the individual survives the death of his body, although feeble souls harbor such thoughts through fear or ridiculous egotism. It was printed in the New York Times in 1955. Well, what is Albert Einstein saying about me? If he cannot imagine these things, and I do imagine them based on the Bible, what is he telling me?
That you're feeble or an egotistical maniac, that you're just too dumb to understand. And it's sad that somebody who was so involved in the laws of physics and the math of how the universe works, even down toward the end of his life, couldn't see that there was a creator.
So, we've got the Scopes trial, and then as we work our way up through, I'm not going to cover all of them. 1947 had an effect and things, but in June of the 25th, 1962, the Washington Star said the High Court bans school prayer. The next day, Chicago Tribune said Supreme Court bans school prayers. Let me ask you the question, and Brother Ray, you may be able to answer this one because you was in the school system a long time. Did the Supreme Court in 1962 ban prayer in school? The answer is no. What the Supreme Court said in Engel versus Vitale, as officially summarized, was that state officials may not compose an official state prayer and require that it be recited in the public schools of the state at the beginning of each school day, even if the prayer is denominationally neutral, and pupils who wish to do so may remain silent or be excused from the room. So there was conditions on this, that you cannot make one and require it, but you can still have prayer. But what do people think today and from 1962 when the papers put it out? Prayer's banned. What happens today when something controversial takes place? It goes out in the media, the newspaper, TV, social media, or whatever, and even though there could be a twist in it and it not say exactly what they said, what do people believe?
This has happened just recently with abortion. The media has portrayed the Supreme Court has nationwide has banned abortion. No, what the Supreme Court did is remove the federal protection for abortion and put it back to the states. And so
Where it had been from the beginning of the Constitution, exactly. So, what I want you to do, if you don't do anything, take anything else from this class, I don't care who said it, where it was published, be a Berean, research what's there to make sure what's true and what's not. If you turn on a TV channel today and scroll the news channels, you're going to have some that will not say anything about certain subjects. Why? They don't want you to know the truth. Do your own research. Do your own checking out.
There's also, going back, and I forget who did it, but
Separation of church and state.
yeah, was not an official document. It was just an opinion. But it's been taken to be the truth and the law.
What Brother Jim is referring to is the Baptist Convention thought that the government was going to start dictating a type of religion that people must adhere to. So Jefferson wrote a letter to them stating that that was not so, that there but yet the people want to take it up now that there is this, that's the law. And it was a letter, a personal letter that they are now interpreting as law. So,
Brother Larry, you mentioned the Scopes trial in, what, 25? Is that
yeah.
But he was convicted. I mean, the teacher who was teaching evolution, he was convicted at the trial, right?
Correct, and you had to pay a $100 fine.
So what happened, I guess, from that point where they put their foot down and said, we're not doing this? How did it go from that to being the other way around? Were there other trials or other?
Yeah, that encouraged all the states then to start putting out, Arkansas, Texas, Mississippi, others started banning teaching of evolution in school and that only teaching creation. And there was lawsuits, and then the Supreme Court was coming in and saying, we'll get to one of them here in just a second. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Epperson versus Arkansas, another challenge to the laws, and the court ruled that allowing the teaching of creation while disallowing the teaching of evolution advanced a religion and therefore violated the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Creationists then started lobbying to have laws passed that required teaching of both. But this case was also struck down in 1987 in Edwards versus Aguillard. So as people sue and it goes to the Supreme Court, then they start just chopping away at it. And so what we have gotten to now is that creationists then moved to frame the issue as one of intelligent design, but this too was ruled against in a district court in Kitzmiller versus Dover area schools in 2005. And since 2005, Google Trends found the popularity of search queries for intelligent design in Google search has declined significantly from its height in November of 2004. Now, as of 2024, all 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia includes the teaching of evolution in their public schools science standards, while none teach intelligent design, and creationism is discussed in non-scientific classes such as philosophy, comparative religion, or current affairs. Now, following that, this slide here, if you can make it out, this is the best one that I could find. It shows you the trend in America in belief in God. And you can see where from the 1980s it has been a steady decline, and then about 2005, 6, 7, there has been a sharp decline. What happened around that period of time? Another U.S. Supreme Court ruling. 2015 ruled on same-sex marriage. Now, this is my personal belief that we have gotten to the point now, right now, and where we're 81%, there is the perfect storm against God. The government supports everything that is against God. Same-sex marriage, etc., right on down the line. ACLU involvement is anything goes. You can do anything you want, anywhere you want, anytime you want, unless it's religious, and then it has to be one location. It can't be out there. Parents that lived from the 80s on down are now having kids, and where is the primary numbers that are being researched, those that believe less in God than any other group, is the 18 to 29 group. Who were their parents? People that had been influenced. So we've got everything in society, newspapers, movies, etc. Everything talks about creation and no God versus allowing God to be taught. So it's my opinion that we're at that perfect storm. Government is against God. Social media is against God. Movies, newspapers, celebrities. Anybody is in trouble. Now, let me break it down this way. Let me break it down to minutes in a day. We've got just a few minutes. Or we'll go for a week. Everyone in here, if we attend service 4 times a week, Bible study, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday, 4 times a week. If we then go home and we read the Bible 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week, we have put in 450 minutes of our time looking toward God. How many minutes are there in a week? 10,080. Even what I would consider dedicated people that do 450 minutes a week as dedicated, because we know that throughout the Church of Christ there are those who, the Lord's church, those who spend far less time in the Bible. But if you are one of those that you're spending roughly 4.5% of your time here, and about 96% of your time you're being bombarded by all this outside stuff. So consider the person that doesn't go to worship service, any, that doesn't read the Bible. If he does not have a friend or a family member that is dedicated, he has zero opportunity to hear anything about God. If you don't hear about God, how are you going to know about God?
Larry, I think the biggest problem is everybody believes they are self-sufficient. Don't rely on nobody. And in times of trouble, it turns, and then it only lasts for a little bit.
So, what do we do about it? When obedience is hard, I preached this sermon about 8 years ago, when obedience is hard. And I basically am going to skip through and read some scripture to leave us on a positive note about we need to take care of ourselves first and then try to reach out to the world. But Hebrews 5, 7 through 8, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplication with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Even Christ, the Son of God, suffered and learned obedience. Philippians 2:8, being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. We need to dedicate ourselves to Christ and live for him. Mark 13:13. Ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. The only way we're going to be saved, knowing that all of these hardships are on us, is to do what? Endure. And then Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27, know ye not that which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery and temperate in all things, now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainty, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means which I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Paul is telling us here that we must have self-discipline. There's a couple more. Let me just conclude with Hebrews 12 and 2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, if we put things in a true perspective, being obedient is easier than being disobedient. Mark 12:30, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. If we emblazon that in our memory and put him first and live by his standard, emulate Christ, then we can attempt to reach out to the world and reach the agnostics and atheists. But what we can't do is allow ourselves to be drawn to that side. Thank y'all so much. My time is up. Appreciate it.